The impossible rescue. The battlefield was a nightmare of fire and smoke. Explosions shook the ground as Captain Daniel Carter ran through the ruins of the alien city. His pulse pounded in his ears. His mission was simple: escape before the enemy found him. His ship, the Starfire, was hidden 2 miles away. If he reached it, he could leave this doomed planet behind. But enemy patrols were everywhere. The Drakari, an alien species at war with humanity, hunted for survivors. Any human left behind was executed on sight. Carter pressed against a fallen wall, his rifle gripped tight. He glanced at his scanner. 3 enemy soldiers were nearby. He held his breath, waiting for them to pass. Then he heard it. A soft cry. Weak. Painful. Carter's muscles tensed. He knew that sound. Someone was hurt. He turned his head and saw her. A Drakari woman lay in the rubble, her dark blue skin covered in ash and blood. She had strange, glowing eyes, but they were filled with pain. Her breathing was shallow. Carter's instincts screamed at him to walk away. The Drakari were enemies. He had seen them kill his people without mercy. His orders were clear: do not engage, do not save anyone. But something stopped him. She was alone, abandoned, left to die. The war had no mercy, but did he? The woman coughed, her body shaking. She was dying. Carter hesitated, gripping his weapon. If he helped her, he would become a traitor. If his own people found out, he would be branded a criminal. His ship's AI buzzed in his earpiece. "Captain, we must leave immediately. Enemy reinforcements are approaching." Carter clenched his jaw. He had 10 seconds to decide. The Drakari woman's glowing eyes met his. She wasn't begging. She wasn't afraid. She had already accepted death. Carter cursed under his breath. He slung his rifle, rushed forward, and lifted her into his arms. The moment he touched her, her eyes widened in shock. No human had ever saved a Drakari before. She tried to resist, but she was too weak. "Stay with me," Carter muttered, carrying her toward a small alley. "Don't die on me now." The AI warned him again. "Captain, your actions are unauthorized. The Drakari are hostile." "Are you sure?" Carter didn't answer. Footsteps echoed in the distance. The enemy soldiers had heard something. Carter pressed against the wall, holding his breath. The woman in his arms trembled but stayed silent. The soldiers passed. They didn't see him. Carter moved quickly, staying in the shadows. The Starfire was close, but as he turned a corner, his heart stopped. An enemy cruiser hovered above his ship. Carter's mind raced. If they detected him, they would blow his ship apart. The Drakari woman weakly opened her eyes. She saw the ship, the enemy cruiser, and then looked at Carter. "You saved me," she whispered, her voice barely a breath. "Don't make me regret it," Carter muttered. The AI's voice came again. "Captain, enemy weapons are charging." Carter ran. He sprinted toward the ship, ignoring the pain in his legs. He pressed a button on his wrist. The Starfire's engines roared to life. The enemy spotted him. Alarms blared. Spotlights turned toward him. A red laser sight locked onto his chest. Carter dived into the ship just as the enemy fired. The blast barely missed. The doors sealed shut. Take off. Now." The ship shot into the sky. Enemy cannons fired, missing by inches. The Starfire twisted and turned through the burning sky. Inside the ship, Carter fell to his knees, gasping for breath. The Drakari woman lay motionless beside him. The AI spoke. "We have escaped, for now." Carter looked at the alien woman. He had risked everything for her, and he had no idea what would happen next. Hunted by both sides, Captain Daniel Carter had made the worst mistake of his life, or the best one. He had risked everything to save a dying Drakari woman, an enemy of his people. Now he was a fugitive, hunted by both the human fleet and the Drakari warriors. His ship, the Starfire, sped through the dark void of space, its engines barely holding together after the desperate escape. Carter's hands gripped the controls as he glanced at the ship's sensors. Red warning lights flashed across the screen. The Starfire had taken heavy damage, and the enemy was still tracking him. "Come on, hold together," he muttered, pushing the ship forward. Behind him, on the floor of the small medbay, the Drakari woman lay unconscious. Her dark blue skin was pale, her breathing uneven. She was barely alive. Carter took a deep breath. He had seen Drakari soldiers slaughter his people, burn entire colonies to the ground. He had sworn to never show mercy, but when he had seen her, weak, abandoned, left to die, something inside him had refused to walk away. And now he was paying the price. The ship's AI, Ikikyo, spoke in its calm, emotionless voice. "Captain, we are being pursued. The human fleet has labeled you as a rogue operative. They have issued a shoot-on-sight order." Carter closed his eyes for a moment, cursing under his breath. Of course, he wasn't just a fugitive. He was a traitor now. Then ECHO continued. "Incoming transmission. Origin. Drakari warship." Carter's heart pounded. The Drakari. He had expected his own people to come after him, but the Drakari weren't supposed to know yet. His fingers hovered over the console. If he answered, they might track his position. If he ignored them, they might assume he had kidnapped one of their own. Before he could decide, a weak voice spoke from behind him. "She's might. Sister." Carter spun around. The Drakari woman was awake. Her glowing blue eyes flickered weakly as she tried to sit up, but pain forced her back down. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Carter frowned. "What are you talking about?" She took a shaky breath. "The warship. It's looking for me." Carter's stomach twisted. If a Drakari warship was searching for her, it meant one thing. She wasn't just some soldier. She was important. The transmission repeated. "Human vessel. Respond." Carter hesitated. If he answered, he could explain himself. But the Drakari were not known for their kindness. If he refused, they might open fire immediately. The woman weakly reached out, her hand gripping his sleeve. Her eyes burned into his. "Don't let them find me." Carter didn't understand. If the Drakari were her people, why was she running from them? A new alarm blared through the ship. "Captain, an enemy fleet has locked onto our signal." Carter's blood turned cold. He had taken too long. The human fleet and the Drakari warship had both found him, and he was trapped between them. The ship rocked violently as the first warning shots fired across the bow. The human fleet had arrived first, demanding his surrender. The Drakari ship was only minutes away. Carter's hands flew across the controls. He couldn't fight two fleets at once. He needed a way out. He turned to the Drakari woman. "You said they're looking for you. Why? Who are you?" She hesitated. "I am Zeravel, daughter of the High Lord of the Drakari Empire." Carter felt the blood drain from his face. He had saved a Drakari princess. No wonder the Drakari warship was hunting him. No wonder his own fleet had marked him for death. He had accidentally started an intergalactic war. The ship shook again. The human fleet was preparing to fire. The Drakari warship was closing in. Carter had seconds to make a choice. He slammed a button on the console. Prepare for an emergency hyperspace jump. Now." ECHO hesitated. "Captain, the ship is too damaged for a safe jump." "We don't have a choice." Carter snapped. The lights flickered as the ship's engines powered up. The hyperspace drive hummed dangerously. The human fleet commander's voice came through the speakers. "Surrender now, Captain Carter, or be destroyed." A second voice, cold and alien, followed. "Return the High Lord's daughter, or your species will suffer." Zyra stared at him. "Carter, you could give me to them." Carter gritted his teeth. "And what? Let them kill you." "Not happening." The human ships charged their weapons. The Drakari warship locked onto them. Carter took a deep breath. Jumping now. He hit the button. The Starfire exploded forward, vanishing into hyperspace just as the first shots fired. For now, they were free. But they had only made things worse. The truth about Zyra. The Starfire hurtled through hyperspace, its engines groaning under the strain. Inside the cockpit, Captain Daniel Carter exhaled slowly, his fingers trembling against the control panel. He had just escaped death by a fraction of a second. But he wasn't safe. His own people had branded him a traitor. The Drakari Empire had marked him as a kidnapper. He was now the most wanted human in the galaxy, all because he had saved one alien woman. And not just any woman. She was Ziravel, daughter of the Drakari High Lord. Carter turned in his seat to look at her. Zyra was barely conscious, her breathing still shallow. Her dark blue skin was marked with dried blood, her alien features exhausted. "You didn't tell me you were royalty," Carter muttered. Zyra's glowing eyes flickered open, filled with pain. "You didn't ask." Carter sighed, rubbing his temples. "You know, a heads up would have been nice before I pissed off 2 entire fleets." Zyra tried to sit up but winced in pain. "I never asked you to save me." Carter narrowed his eyes. "You didn't have to. I wasn't going to leave you to die." She studied him for a moment, her glowing blue eyes filled with something unreadable. Then she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't belong to them anymore." Carter frowned. "What do you mean?" Zyra hesitated, then turned her head away. "You wouldn't understand." Carter crossed his arms. "Try me." She was silent for a long moment, staring at the floor as if debating whether to trust him. Finally, she took a shaky breath. "My father, he is not like your leaders. In the Drakari Empire, family is duty, not love. We are raised to serve, to obey without question." Her glowing eyes darkened. "My father planned to give me away. As a token of peace in a war he had no intention of ending. He arranged a political marriage to one of his warlords, a man who has killed millions of your kind." Carter felt something cold twist in his gut. "So you ran." Zyra's hands clenched into fists. "I tried. But my people do not tolerate traitors. When they found me, they left me for dead." Carter leaned back, exhaling. That explained why she hadn't called for help, why she had begged him not to let them find her. She was hunted by her own kind. "You saved the wrong person, Carter," Zyra whispered. "I am not your enemy. But I am no one's ally either." Carter rubbed his chin. "So what now?" Zyra looked at him, uncertain. "I don't know." Before Carter could respond, the ship's alarms blared. Isiko's robotic voice cut through the silence. "Captain, hyperspace exit imminent. Warning. Destination unknown." Carter's eyes widened. "What? I didn't program a destination." ECHO hesitated. "Hyperspace route was compromised due to engine damage. We are being pulled out early." Carter cursed under his breath. "Hold on." The Starfire jolted violently as it dropped out of hyperspace, hurling Carter and Zyra forward. The ship spun out of control, its systems flickering, alarms screaming in warning. Through the viewport, Carter saw an enormous dark shape in the void. A massive, abandoned space station, floating in the middle of nowhere. "Where the hell are we?" Carter muttered. Zyra forced herself upright, staring at the massive structure. Her eyes widened in recognition. "This place," she whispered. "It shouldn't exist." Carter shot her a sharp look. "You know this station." Zyra hesitated before nodding. "It's not on any of your maps. Even the Drakari have forgotten about it." Carter frowned. "What is it?" Zyra's voice was barely a whisper. "It's a graveyard." A chill ran down Carter's spine. The Starfire shuddered violently as it drifted toward the station. The engines were completely dead. They had no choice. They had to dock. "Ishicho, scan the station," Carter ordered. The AI responded instantly. "Structure is intact. Power levels are minimal. No signs of life detected." Carter exhaled. That was something, at least. "All right. We land, repair the ship, and get the hell out of here. But Zyra wasn't listening. She was still staring at the station, her glowing eyes filled with unease. "This place isn't abandoned," she murmured. "Something is still here." Carter frowned but didn't have time to argue. He maneuvered the failing Starfire toward a docking bay. The ship landed with a rough, shuddering thud. The silence that followed was deafening. Carter unbuckled his seatbelt and grabbed his rifle. "All right, Princess. Let's see if we can find a way to fix the ship." Zyra looked at him. "You're not worried about what's inside?" Carter forced a smirk. "I've already got the Drakari and my own people trying to kill me. Whatever's in there, it'll have to get in line." Zyra sighed and stood up, clearly still weak. Carter opened the hatch. A wave of cold, stale air rushed in. The station was dark, silent as a tomb. The only light came from flickering emergency panels along the walls. Carter stepped inside, gripping his rifle tight. Zyra followed, her glowing eyes cutting through the dimness. The corridor stretched ahead, vast and empty. But something about it felt wrong. Carter's instincts screamed at him. Something was watching them. Then a sound echoed through the halls. A low, inhuman growl. Carter and Zyra froze. Carter raised his rifle, his heart hammering in his chest. "Tell me that was the ship settling." Zyra didn't move. Her voice was cold and certain. "No, we are not alone." The shadows ahead shifted. A shape moved in the darkness. And then the lights went out. A desperate gamble. The station plunged into darkness. A wave of cold, suffocating silence filled the air. Captain Daniel Carter tightened his grip on his rifle, his heart hammering in his chest. The only sound was the soft hum of his suit's power core and Zyra's uneven breathing beside him. Then, in the pitch-black corridor ahead, something moved. It was slow, deliberate, a whisper of motion, just beyond his field of vision. Carter's instincts screamed at him. Predator. Stalking. Watching. His voice came out as a harsh whisper. "Ichicho, give me a scan." The AI's voice crackled in his earpiece. Power levels critical. Sensors unstable. Detecting. Movement. Unable to identify. Carter cursed under his breath. Of course. Beside him, Zyra's glowing blue eyes flickered, illuminating the immediate area. Her breath was unsteady. "This place is wrong," she whispered. "I told you, it's not abandoned." Carter steadied his rifle, slowly scanning the corridor ahead. The station was ancient, its walls covered in deep scars and strange, alien markings. Some were burned by plasma fire. Others looked like claw marks. Whatever had happened here, it had been violent. Carter activated the flashlight on his rifle, sending a narrow beam of light cutting through the dark. The corridor stretched endlessly in both directions, filled with debris, rusted machinery, and his breath caught. Bodies. Drakari bodies, long dead, their armor shattered, their faces frozen in terror. Zyra's eyes widened. No. She stepped forward, staring at the remains of her people. Some of them had weapons drawn. Others had died trying to run. Carter exhaled sharply. What the hell happened here? Zyra shook her head. I don't know. I thought this place was a myth. A lost station. A warning. She knelt beside one of the fallen Drakari, her fingers brushing over the ancient, cracked armor. "They called it Solace 9, she murmured. "A station built long before this war, before our people even encountered yours." Carter kept his rifle up, scanning the shadows. So what was it for? Zyra hesitated. A research outpost, studying something our people found drifting in the void. Carter's gut twisted. And what exactly did they find? Before she could answer, a deep, inhuman growl rumbled through the corridor. Carter snapped his rifle up, his finger hovering over the trigger. Zyra froze, her glowing eyes darting to the darkness beyond. The sound was unnatural, a chilling, guttural noise that didn't belong to anything living, at least nothing that should exist. Then something skittered in the dark. Fast. Carter's flashlight beam jerked sideways, catching a glimpse of something moving across the walls. A shape, thin, too many limbs, stretching impossibly long. It was watching them. Zaira backed up, her entire body tense. "Carter, we need to go. Now." Carter didn't argue. He pivoted, gripping her arm. "Move." They sprinted down the corridor, their footsteps echoing against the metal floors. The thing in the dark moved with them, keeping pace just out of sight. Carter's brain worked fast. Think. Where's the control room? Where's power? Then he saw it, a half-open blast door ahead, leading into a control chamber. Inside. "Go." Zara slid through first, Carter right behind her. The moment they were in, he slammed his fist against the control panel. The door screeched shut, sealing with a deep metallic clunk. Silence. For a few breathless seconds, neither of them moved. Then, something slammed against the door. A heavy, bone-cracking impact that made the metal dent inward. Zara flinched. Carter aimed his rifle at the door, but he knew whatever was on the other side was stronger than they were. Isiko's voice crackled in his earpiece. "Captain, I strongly advise leaving this station immediately." "No kidding," Carter muttered. He turned, scanning the control room. Unlike the hallways, it still had power, barely. Screens flickered, filled with static and corrupted data. Then, Carter spotted something on one of the monitors, a log file. He tapped the console, and the recording crackled to life. A Drakari scientist's voice filled the room, distorted and filled with fear. "We were wrong. We never should have brought it here. It learns. It waits. It watches us. And now, it's hungry." Carter felt a chill crawl up his spine. Zaira's face was pale, her eyes locked on the screen. The log continued, the scientist's voice turning to desperation. "We sealed it away, but it's too late. It won't let us leave. It doesn't want to kill us. It wants to use us, change us. If anyone finds this, run. Do not stay. Do not." The log cut out. The room was silent again. Then, the lights flickered. Zara grabbed Carter's arm, her voice deadly serious. "We need to fix your ship. Now." Carter exhaled sharply, his mind racing. "Ichisho, what's the status of the Starfire?" The AI hesitated. "Minimal power. Engine repairs possible, but we require fuel." Carter clenched his jaw. "Let me guess. This station has some." "Affirmative. Reactor core located on the lower deck." Zara stiffened. "We're not going down there." Carter glanced at the control panel. A schematic of the station flickered on screen, showing a vast lower section filled with abandoned labs. "The fuel's down there," he said. "We don't have a choice." Zara shook her head. "That thing, it's been waiting. It killed my people. It's not going to let us leave." Carter tightened his grip on his rifle. "Then we make it regret trying." He turned toward the exit, his eyes cold with determination. Zara exhaled, then followed. They had a plan. Now, they just had to survive. The betrayal. The station groaned, metal creaking under unseen pressure. The air was stale, heavy with something Carter couldn't explain. A feeling, like the weight of 1,000 watching eyes pressing against his skin. They were not alone. Captain Daniel Carter tightened his grip on his rifle as he and Zara moved deeper into the station. Their objective was clear. Reach the lower decks, find the fuel, and get the hell off this haunted relic. Simple plan. Impossible execution. Zara walked beside him, silent but tense. Her glowing blue eyes constantly flicked toward the shadows. Her body language screaming one thing. She knew something he didn't. Carter finally broke the silence. "You're scared." She scoffed, but there was no humor in it. "I'd be a fool if I wasn't." Carter exhaled. "You knew about this place before we landed." Zara hesitated. Then, after a moment, she nodded. "Not everything. Only rumors." He glanced at her. What kind of rumors? She swallowed. They say this station was built to study something my people found in the void. A relic from a time before the Drakari Empire, before our history was even written. Carter frowned. And Zyra's voice lowered. And it wasn't dead. A chill ran down Carter's spine. You're telling me we're walking into a lab full of prehistoric nightmares? Zyra didn't answer. She didn't have to. The station shuddered again, deep vibrations running through the floor beneath them. Carter's HUD flickered, his suit registering strange electromagnetic distortions. Then, something moved behind them. A slow, deliberate scrape against metal. Zyra turned first, her eyes locking onto the darkness of the hallway they had just passed. Her breathing hitched. Carter followed her gaze, lifting his rifle. The hallway was empty. Too empty. He knew the feeling. The kind you get when someone is right behind you. Carter exhaled sharply. Keep moving. They pushed forward, reaching a maintenance hatch leading down to the lower decks. The air was colder here, damp with condensation. Pipes ran along the ceiling, dripping with moisture. Isiko's voice crackled through Carter's earpiece. Captain, energy readings indicate fuel reserves in the primary reactor chamber. Carter nodded and unlatched the hatch. A rusted ladder led downward into darkness. Zyra didn't move. Carter looked at her. You first, princess. She shot him a glare. If I get eaten, I'm haunting you. Carter smirked. Wouldn't be my first ghost. Zyra exhaled sharply and descended first, her glowing eyes barely illuminating the shaft. Carter followed, keeping his rifle slung over his shoulder. The moment his boots touched the lower deck, the hatch slammed shut above them. Zyra spun around. That wasn't me. Carter cursed. Ichicho report. The AI responded. Unknown interference detected. Localized lockdown in effect. Carter scanned the area. The lower deck was vast, filled with towering reactor conduits and rusted machinery. Everything was covered in a thin layer of bioorganic residue, as if something had been growing here. Zyra exhaled. We need to move fast. Carter nodded, stepping toward a central control terminal. He tapped at the console. It barely responded, flickering between old logs and corrupted data. Then, a transmission appeared on screen. A live signal. Carter's stomach twisted. We're picking up a broadcast. Zyra narrowed her eyes. That's not possible. No one should be here. Then the voice came through. A deep, distorted Drakari voice. Human vessel. Captain Carter. We know you are here. Carter and Zyra froze. The voice continued. We have been watching. You cannot leave this place. You will not be allowed to take the princess. Zyra's breath hitched. She stepped back, her glowing eyes wide. Carter's grip on his rifle tightened. Who the hell is this? The transmission flickered. Then, the screen displayed a live feed from inside the Starfire. Carter's blood turned to ice. A group of Drakari soldiers stood in his ship, weapons drawn. They had already boarded. Zyra whispered, No, they found us. Carter clenched his jaw. Ichicho, are you compromised? The AI hesitated. Foreign system breach detected. The Drakari commander's voice returned. Surrender now, Carter. Hand over the princess, and you will live. Zyra stepped away from him. Carter turned to her, his voice sharp. Don't even think about it. Her jaw tightened. If I go with them, they'll let you go. Carter's expression darkened. They won't. The second you step into their custody, they'll kill both of us. Zyra hesitated, conflict flashing across her face. Carter exhaled, forcing himself to think. The Starfire was compromised. They had nowhere to run. Unless. His gaze flickered toward the reactor core. A desperate idea formed in his mind. A last gamble. He turned back to the terminal, typing rapidly. The controls were barely functional, but if he was right. Zyra's voice sharpened. What are you doing? Carter glanced at her. Ending this. The reactor rumbled to life. An alarm blared through the station. Zyra's eyes widened. "No, you're not." Carter smirked grimly. "Yep." The station's fail-safe system activated. A countdown appeared on the screen. 10 minutes until reactor overload. Zyra grabbed his arm. "You just turned this into a death trap." Carter met her eyes. "Exactly. Now, they have to choose. Chase us or get the hell out." The Drakari transmission crackled. "What have you done?" Carter lifted his rifle. "I made the choice for you." Then he grabbed Zyra's hand and ran. Behind them, the station groaned violently as energy surged through the decayed metal. The game had changed. Now, the hunters were the hunted. The final stand. The station shook violently, metal beams groaning under the stress of the reactor's overload. Sparks rained from the ceiling, and the floor beneath Carter and Zyra's feet trembled like a beast awakening from slumber. 10 minutes. That's all they had before the station's core exploded in a white-hot eruption of energy. Carter didn't look back. He couldn't. He dragged Zyra forward, sprinting through the labyrinth of machinery, steam vents, and exposed wiring. Every step was a gamble. Would the floor hold, or would it collapse beneath them? "Do you have a plan?" Zyra shouted over the alarms, her voice tight with urgency. Carter's heart pounded. "Yeah. Don't die." She shot him a glare. "I meant an actual plan." Carter gritted his teeth. They had to get back to the Starfire. That was the only way out. But with the Drakari soldiers already aboard, there was no telling what awaited them. Zyra's grip on his arm tightened. "We're being followed." Carter threw a glance over his shoulder, and his blood ran cold. Dark shapes moved in the smoke-filled corridors behind them. Not Drakari, not human. Something else. The thing that had killed Zyra's people. Carter clenched his jaw. They had woken it up. A chilling, insect-like chittering echoed through the air, followed by a wet, scraping sound, like bone against metal. Carter shoved Zyra forward. "Run. Now." She didn't argue. They tore through the corridor, the failing lights flickering wildly, casting distorted shadows that made it impossible to tell where the enemy was. A sudden roar erupted behind them. Not an animal sound. Not even a Drakari growl. It was wrong. Something fast slammed into the walls behind them, moving in ways that shouldn't be possible. The metal buckled under the impact. Then, a scream. Not Zyra's. Not Carter's. One of the Drakari soldiers. Carter's stomach twisted. The Drakari had boarded this station to capture them. Now, they had bigger problems. Zyra skidded to a stop at a split in the corridor. Which way? Carter barely hesitated. Left. They bolted down a dimly lit passage, following the emergency evacuation signs toward the docking bay. Then, the sound of footsteps. Not the creature. Drakari. Zyra froze, pressing against the wall. "They're ahead of us." Carter exhaled. Of course they were. The Drakari had split their forces. Some had gone after the Starfire, while others had hunted them directly. Now, Carter and Zyra were trapped between two threats. Zyra pulled a small energy dagger from her belt, her glowing blue eyes flickering with resolve. "We need to move." Carter nodded. He wasn't going to wait around to get cornered. They needed to break through. Then the ceiling above them buckled. A Drakari soldier came crashing down, screaming. Something huge dropped with him. It was impossible to see it clearly. The moment Carter's flashlight touched it, the light warped and twisted, like reality itself refused to define its shape. The soldier shrieked as the creature's limbs, too many limbs, wrapped around him. Then, silence. The Drakari was gone. Carter didn't stop to think. He grabbed Zyra's wrist and bolted forward, straight toward the Drakari blockade ahead. At least they were alive. The soldiers spotted them instantly, raising their weapons. "Stop them!" Zyra shouted in her native tongue, her voice cutting through the chaos. The lead Drakari hesitated, just long enough. Carter didn't wait for diplomacy. He fired first. His plasma rifle's shot blasted through their formation, forcing them to scatter. Zyra used the distraction to lunge forward, disarming one of the soldiers with a brutal strike to the throat. Carter didn't stop moving. The docking bay was just ahead. He could see the Starfire. The Drakari reinforcements had set up a perimeter around the ship. There were at least 10 of them, all heavily armed. Carter gritted his teeth. No way they were getting on board like this. Then, a loud, guttural roar filled the air. The creature was here, and it was hungry. The Drakari turned, weapons raised, just as the shadows themselves seemed to shift. The beast lunged. A mass of writhing limbs and snapping jaws tore into their ranks. Plasma fire lit up the bay, but it was useless. Bullets and energy blasts did nothing. Screams filled the air. Carter grabbed Zyra's arm. Go. Now. They sprinted for the Starfire. The docking ramp was still down, but the controls were locked. Carter slammed his fist against his comm. Isicho, override the lockdown. The AI responded immediately. Unauthorized access detected. Purging enemy systems. Stand by. Zyra turned, her energy dagger flashing as she cut down a Drakari who got too close. Carter shot another soldier, then turned his attention back to the monster. It was wiping out the Drakari soldiers one by one, but it wasn't just killing them. It was absorbing them. Their bodies vanished into its shifting form, like they were being swallowed by the void itself. Carter felt his stomach churn. That thing wasn't eating them. It was becoming them. Then, the Starfire's engines roared to life. Isiko's voice crackled in his earpiece. Captain, systems are online. Boarding ramp unlocked. Carter didn't wait. He shoved Zyra forward, then ran up the ramp right behind her. The moment they were inside, he slammed his fist on the door controls. The hatch sealed shut behind them. For a moment, they just breathed. Then, a deafening explosion rocked the station. Carter bolted for the cockpit, Zyra close behind him. Through the viewport, the station was coming apart. Metal beams collapsed, sections of the structure imploding from within. The creature, whatever it was still alive. It watched them, shifting and warping. Then, it moved. It lunged, straight for the ship. Carter punched the throttle. The Starfire roared as it shot forward, tearing free from the station's gravity, just as the entire structure erupted in a blinding explosion. The shockwave hit them, sending the ship into a violent spin. Carter fought the controls, gritting his teeth. Come on, baby, hold together. Zyra held onto the co-pilot's seat, her eyes locked on the viewport. Tell me we made it. Carter exhaled. The station was gone, reduced to nothing but drifting wreckage. But he knew. They hadn't killed it. They had just delayed the inevitable. He turned to Zyra. We need to warn people. Zyra's expression was grim. Who's going to believe us? Carter exhaled. Then we'll make them. Zyra hesitated, then nodded. They had survived. But the war wasn't over. It was just beginning. The unthinkable. The Starfire drifted through the void, its engines running hot from the narrow escape. The massive explosion of Solace 9 was still fresh in Carter's mind. The fireball, the station tearing itself apart, the thing inside it watching them, even as it was consumed by flames. But Carter knew the truth. It wasn't dead. He sat in the pilot's seat, hands gripping the controls too tightly, his mind racing. Zyra sat beside him, silent, staring at the vastness of space, as if she could still see the remnants of the nightmare they had barely escaped. Finally, Zyra broke the silence. We need to go dark. Carter blinked, turning to her. What? Zyra's glowing eyes met his. The Drakari will track us. So will your people. We need to disappear. Carter exhaled, rubbing his face. Disappear where? Half the galaxy wants us dead. The other half thinks we're already traitors or kidnappers. Zaira leaned forward, pulling up the navigation console. A star map flickered into view, one filled with red zones, restricted territories, and high-threat warnings. She pointed to a system deep within uncharted space. Here. Carter frowned. That's suicide. Zaira shook her head. No, that's our only chance. Carter studied the map. The Lorien Expanse, a region filled with ancient ruins, collapsed planets, and ghost signals from civilizations long gone. A dead zone. He looked back at her. What's there? Zaira hesitated. A place the Drakari never dared to go. Carter's gut twisted. And why the hell is that? Zaira exhaled, tapping the screen. Because it's where they found it. Silence fell between them. Carter leaned back, letting the weight of her words sink in. The thing they had seen in the station, the nightmare that had consumed an entire Drakari research crew, wasn't just some rogue mutation. It was something ancient, something that had been waiting. Zaira's voice was barely a whisper. If it survived the explosion, it won't stop. It will spread. Carter exhaled sharply. And you think this place holds answers? Zaira nodded. If we want to stop it, we have to understand it. Carter stared at the screen for a long moment, his thoughts colliding. He wasn't a scientist. He wasn't some hero trying to save the galaxy. He was just a soldier who had made one choice, and that choice had put him in the middle of something far bigger than a war. Finally, he sighed and set the coordinates. Fine, but if this turns out to be another death trap, I'm blaming you. Zaira smirked, though there was no humor in her eyes. Fair. Carter activated the hyperdrive. The engines roared, and the ship lurched forward, vanishing into the darkness of deep space. But they weren't alone. As the starfire vanished, a shadow drifted in the wreckage of Solace 9. It watched. It waited. And then it moved. The nightmare wasn't over. It had just begun. Epilogue. The message. Somewhere in deep space, a classified human military outpost hovered in the orbit of a distant dying sun. Inside its heavily fortified communications room, a lone officer sat at his station, sipping cold coffee, eyes glazed from hours of dull routine. Then his screen flickered. A distorted transmission appeared, a signal so broken, so warped, it barely made sense. The officer frowned, adjusting the controls. The audio crackled, words bleeding through static. If anyone hears this, this is Captain Daniel Carter of the Starfire. This is not a distress call. The officer sat up, suddenly alert. We found something. No, we woke it up. It's still out there, spreading, consuming. The audio cut in and out. Then, Carter's voice returned, frantic, urgent. Do not engage. Do not hunt it. If you see the signs, if you hear the whispers, run. The transmission ended. For a long moment, silence filled the room. Then red lights flashed across the station. A new signal appeared. An unknown presence had been detected near the outpost, and it was watching.